My girlfriend told me to make sure my parents don't go to our wedding because they don't fit our status. The next day, I canceled a couple of invitations, the ones for my mother-in-law and my girlfriend. I will never forget the day my future wife smiled and teased, "Make sure your parents don't come to our wedding. They're poor." That day, my blood boiled, but I didn't say anything. I had a better plan. First, a little background. When I was little, my parents were poor. Those kinds of poor, who fight every day to not go hungry. We lived in a humble neighborhood in a small adobe house with a metal roof that turned into an oven in summer and leaked like crazy in winter. There were no luxuries, not even the basics. Sometimes I recall that many nights our dinner was just a plate of beans with tortillas, and if we were lucky, a little piece of cheese that my mom would save like gold. But they never complained. Dad used to say, "As long as we have each other, everything else can be fixed," and Mom would agree, stroking my hair while telling me to eat slowly to fill up more. They were my world. My dad, Jose, was a tall, skinny man with sun-kissed skin. He worked doing whatever he could, sometimes carrying sacks at the market and other times helping a neighbor with construction work. My mom, Rosa, was short, with small but strong hands. She washed other people's clothes, sold tamales on the corner, or collected cans to sell for a few pesos. They didn't have much of an education. They could barely read and write, but they had something worth more than any degree: heart. Everything they did was for me. My parents would skip meals so I could have something on my plate. Once, when I had a high fever and there was no money for medicine, Dad walked for hours to the neighboring village to borrow some from a friend. He came back with a bottle of syrup and a bag of oranges someone had given him. "This will make you better, champ," he said, and stayed up all night, with Mom, making sure my fever went down. They never got married, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. A wedding, even a simple one, cost money they didn't have. Dad promised Mom a white dress and a celebration with music, but life never gave them the chance. "One day, I will," he would say, and she smiled as if believing him. When I finished high school, they wanted me to study more, but there was no money for college, so I started working. I was 16 when I got a job at a small store in the neighborhood, stocking shelves and carrying boxes. That's where it all began. The owner, Don Miguel, was an older man who took a liking to me. He said I had the spark and knew how to deal with people. He taught me how to run the business, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to attend customers, and much more. When I turned 19, Don Miguel decided to close the store and move away with his daughter. Before he left, he told me, "This place is yours if you want it. I'll leave it cheap because I know you'll make it grow." So I decided to do it. It wasn't easy, but I made it happen. I started small, offering the basics: rice, beans, soap. Then I began to grow. By the time I turned 22, the little corner shop had turned into a famous supermarket in the city where everyone shopped. Suddenly I realized we were no longer poor. I, the son of Jose and Rosa, had money in the bank. Millions to buy a house, a car, and give my parents something they never had: peace of mind. I moved my parents to a large house with real floors and a roof that didn't leak. I bought them new clothes, a big TV, and a stove that didn't need to be lit with wood. But they didn't change. They remained the same humble, kind, and grateful people. Dad continued carving wood in his spare time, and Mom still cooked beans as if nothing ever changed. "We don't need more, honey. As long as you're well, we've won," they told me, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world. Then I met Tatiana. It was at a party of a mutual friend. I was 23 when she appeared like a movie star, tall with long, shiny hair and enchanting green eyes. She was beautiful, but she also knew how to move, how to talk. That night, she told me she liked my energy and that I was different. She wasn't a rich girl. I found that out later. She came from a normal family, not wealthy, but not starving either. She told me about her life and how she dreamed of getting ahead, and I shared my story, how I had built everything I had from scratch. She seemed interested, and I felt good with her. Everything seemed perfect, and soon we became a couple. We went out to dinner and drove around in my car. She always found a way to make me laugh, saying things like, "You're different from the others. You have something special." Growing up feeling invisible in a neighborhood where no one expected anything from me, those words melted my heart. I wanted to give her the best and make her feel that with me, she would never lack anything. So I invited her into my world to meet the people who mattered most in my life, my parents. When Tatiana arrived, she wore a tight dress and high heels that echoed against the marble floor. She looked beautiful, but as soon as she entered, her gaze landed on my parents. She wrinkled her nose like something stank, and her smile twisted into a sneer. Mom greeted her with her usual warmth. "Oh, how good to see you, sweetie. Come in. Can I get you some coffee or a soda?" she said, her hands a bit shaky, but her heart wide open. Dad, clumsily adjusting his shirt that was a bit too big for him, offered his hand. "Nice to meet you, Tatiana. My son has told us a lot about you," he said with a humble smile. She barely shook their hands, quickly withdrawing as if to clean her hands with her dress, saying a half-hearted hello and sitting on the leather couch, crossing her legs, eyeing them not with admiration but with disdain. "No thanks, I'm fine," she said brusquely when Mom insisted on the coffee. The afternoon felt tense. Mom tried to talk to her, asking as kindly as possible, "Where are you from, honey? What do you like to do?" While putting a plate of tortillas on the table, still wrapped in an old cloth she had used for years. Tatiana looked at her as if she were an insect. "Nothing special from around here," she said dryly, and then added with a cruel laugh. "Hey, do you always sound like this? I mean, this house is nice, but they look like they came out of a farm." She mocked, and Mom, nervously giggling, tried to diffuse it, saying, "Oh yes, we're simple, dear." Tatiana raised an eyebrow and murmured, "Simple is an understatement." Dad tried to show her a small piece of wood he had been carving. "I make these things as a hobby," he said shyly, but she looked him up and down, from his poorly fitted shirt to his worn shoes, declaring, "Exotic. Looks like they don't know how to spend their son's money." I tried to ease the situation by mentioning how I bought the house for them, but she didn't listen. As we left, she jumped in the car while fixing her hair, saying, "Seriously, your parents are so simple, they smell like the country." She said it like she expected me to agree with her. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but I said nothing. I thought maybe this was just something that would change over time, that she would come to love them. I was wrong. After that, Tatiana made it clear she repulsed my parents. She knew everything they had, the house, the clothes, the food, was from me, and that made her look at them as parasites. "Let's leave your parents, I can't stand how they look," she said, scrunching her face. Once on Christmas, Mom gave Tatiana a hand-embroidered tablecloth. It was beautiful, with red and green flowers that took her weeks to finish. She said, "I made it thinking of you, sweetie, so you have something lovely for your home." Tatiana looked at it for a second and said, "Oh, thanks, but I don't know if I'll use it. It's not my style," tossing it aside like rubbish. Mom fell silent, clutching her hands in her lap. Dad looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't just sadness, but disappointment. Yet, here I was, being a fool, wanting to keep Tatiana happy, afraid of losing her. Over time, I saw clearly. Tatiana hated them for who they were, humble, marked by poverty. Even when I gave them everything, she didn't see their love. Only their rough hands, mismatched clothes, and simple ways amazed me with disappointed pity. I let her walk all over them, blinding myself with love. A while later, one night under the lights of a fancy restaurant she chose, I pulled out a ring I had bought and asked, "Tatiana, will you marry me?" With my heart in my throat. She smiled in that way that made me tremble and said, "Yes, of course." The people around us clapped, and I felt like I was touching the sky. Finally, I thought we were going to build something together. She would understand what my parents meant to me, how wrong I was. 3 days before the wedding, "Make sure your parents don't go to our wedding. They don't fit our status. They're poor," She said it without hesitation, with a tone that was half mockery and half command. I looked at her, waiting for her to say she was joking, but no. Her cold, hard, green eyes told me it was not a joke. My blood boiled. I felt the ground shift beneath me, but I said nothing. I nodded, turned around, and walked away, barely sleeping that night, overwhelmed with tears. I thought of my parents and everything they had done for me, of their rough hands, tired smiles, and the love they had given me without asking for anything in return. I thought of Tatiana, my future wife, and the love I had for her, but also about how she had belittled my parents. That's when I reacted. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to be her puppet anymore. The next morning, I woke up early and called the wedding planner, a serious guy I had hired, because Tatiana wanted something classy. I told him to make a change on the guest list, remove 2 people, Tatiana and her mother. I said it firmly, even though I felt shaky inside. He hesitated for a moment, unsure. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes. I'm sure they're not coming. I'm the one paying, I decide," I cut in, hanging up before he could argue. Then I took a deep breath and decided to visit my parents. I told them to come to my wedding, and they agreed. The day of the wedding arrived. The church was decorated just as Tatiana insisted, filled with white flowers, expensive candles, a choir that cost a fortune. The invited guests, my friends and her acquaintance, filled the pews. My parents arrived early, nervous but happy. Mom wore a simple dress that I bought for her, but she wore her usual sandals. Dad showed up in the same poorly buttoned shirt and worn shoes. I saw them sitting in the back, humble as always, and felt an angry mix of love and frustration. They deserved to be up front, not hidden away. Then the chaos started. Tatiana arrived in a white car, looking like a queen in the wedding dress I had paid for. Her mother followed, wearing an expression of superiority that made my stomach turn. But when they tried to enter, the security guards to whom I had given clear instructions blocked their way. "Sorry, you're not on the list," one firm guard stated. Tatiana turned red with rage. "I'm the bride. Let me in or I'll have you fired," she screamed as her mother added, "They don't know who they're messing with." The guests whispered among themselves, and I heard it all from outside. I walked to the entrance, dressed in the suit I had chosen for my supposed wedding. Tatiana saw me and rushed over, saying, "What's going on? These guys won't let me in. Fix this now." Her eyes were on fire. Looking at her, I felt a calmness I hadn't experienced in years. "There's nothing to fix, Tatiana. There won't be a wedding between us. It's over," I said confidently. She staggered back as if I had hit her. "Are you crazy? You can't do this to me," she shouted as her mother jumped in. "You ungrateful brat. My daughter deserves better than you and your filthy parents." That was when I lost it. My filthy parents. They are worth 1,000 times more than you. They gave me everything and sacrificed for me while you, Tatiana, just focused on belittling them. I took a breath before continuing. "To be truthful, I never want to see you around me or them ever again," pointing my finger at her. Tatiana crumbled to her knees, her white dress dragging on the floor, crying, "Please, I love you, don't do this," with tears that seemed more out of rage than sadness. Her mother tugged at her arm, shrieking insults, but I no longer listened. I turned away and walked into the church where the guests were in shock, but I didn't care. I walked up to the altar where the priest stood, confused, then gestured for my parents to come forward. They looked at each other but approached, trembling. I knelt before them, tears in my eyes. "Mom, Dad, you never had a wedding because there wasn't enough money. But today, this is for you. I want you to marry right here, right now, as you always deserved." Mom covered her mouth, crying. Dad put his hand on my shoulder, his eyes shining. "What are you saying, son?" he whispered. "I'm saying, I love you both, and nobody is ever going to trample over you again. Let me give you this moment," I replied. After a moment of doubt, the priest smiled and said, "Well, if they're willing." My parents looked at each other and Mom nodded with a smile I hadn't seen in years. "Yes, Jose, let's get married," she whispered. The ceremony was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Mom in her sandals with the simple dress, and Dad with his poorly fastened shirt, their hands held together. Before the altar, the priest spoke as they promised each other eternal love. When they said "I do," the guests applauded, some crying. I stood there with a full heart. Tatiana and her mother had left, defeated, but it didn't matter anymore. My parents, who had given me everything, were finally having their moment, and I had made it possible. As they left the church, hand in hand, Mom hugged me so tightly that it almost suffocated me. "Thank you, son. I never thought I would have this," she said through tears. Dad patted my back, not needing words. That night, we had a simple celebration at home with beans and tortillas, like they liked. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Tatiana tried to call me later, sending messages, but I didn't reply. I was no longer her plaything. My parents were my priority, and no one would ever belittle them again. Update 1. Hello, everyone. Thank you to all who supported my decision. It's been 3 months since the wedding day, or should I say since the day my parents finally had the wedding they always deserved. I still smile when thinking about it. Mom in her worn sandals, and Dad in his poorly buttoned shirt, holding hands before the altar, with tears of joy that meant more than all the gold in the world. That image is etched in my mind, and whenever I recall it, I feel that I did the right thing. But everything hasn't been easy since then. Tatiana didn't give up as fast as I hoped. A week after I stood her up at the church entrance, she bombarded me with texts. At first, they were insults. "You're an idiot. You'll regret this. Your family is just a bunch of losers." I read and deleted them without responding. But then, her tone shifted. She started sending messages saying things like, "Please forgive me. I was a fool. I was wrong about your parents. I promise it won't happen again. Give me another chance. I love you." Some days she sent me 10 messages in a row, filled with promises and pleas. Once she even called, crying, saying she had changed and now understood how important my parents were to me. I heard her trembly voice through the speaker, but I hung up and blocked her number. It wasn't just that I didn't believe her, not even a word. It was that I no longer wanted her in my life. Tatiana had shown me who she really was, and there was no turning back. My parents deserved respect, and I deserved someone who saw them the way I saw them, as giants, not as trash. So I stopped reading her messages and thinking about her. To me, Tatiana was now a mistake, a past that taught me to never betray myself or my loved ones again. Life went on. The supermarket continued to grow, and I focused on working and spending time with my parents. They were happier than ever after their wedding. They became inseparable, like newlyweds. Mom started embroidering more tablecloths, but now for herself and Dad, displaying them with pride on the big table in our home. Dad continued carving wood, even making a frame for their wedding picture that now hangs in the living room. "Look, son, now we are legally married," Mom would say, laughing, and Dad would nod with that peaceful smile of his. Seeing them filled me with peace. Then, 2 months ago, I met Laura. It was an ordinary day at the supermarket. She's in charge of the inventory, a girl who had been working there for months, but we hadn't talked much. I noticed her checking some boxes in the storage room with a notebook in hand and hair tied back. I approached to ask about stock, and suddenly, we were laughing over something small. Her brown eyes crinkled in a way that made me want to see her more. Laura is different. She doesn't act like Tatiana. She doesn't try to impress anyone. She's simple, yes, but not ashamed of who she is. She works hard. She knows what it means to earn things, and when I told her my story about my parents and the wedding, she listened with a care that I never got from Tatiana. "Your parents sound incredible," she said, and I could see she meant it. I noticed it when I invited her over one afternoon a month ago. Laura came bearing a bag of oranges she picked up on the way to share. Mom welcomed her with her usual hug, and there were no grimaces or disdain this time. Laura sat with us in the kitchen, drank coffee from the chipped mugs Mom had, and ate beans with tortillas like it was the most normal thing in the world. When Dad showed her one of his wood carvings, she didn't laugh or look at him sideways. "How beautiful, my grandpa used to carve too. I love this," she said, eager to chat and ask questions genuinely. Mom even ended up teaching Laura to embroider, and they both laughed as if they had known each other for years. That night after I dropped Laura at her place, Dad said, "That girl has a good heart, son." And Mom added, "Yes, she knows how to love people for who they are." Laura and I have been seeing each other for 2 months now. It's not long, but everything feels right. There's no rush, no drama. We go to eat tacos at the corner, stroll through the park, and sometimes watch TV or play cards at home with my parents. Today, while I write this from the living room, my parents are in the kitchen laughing about something Dad said. Laura's coming over soon. She said she'd bring a cake to celebrate that the supermarket had its best month. I look around and think about everything I've been through. The poverty, my parents' sacrifices, the mistake with Tatiana, and now this. A peaceful life with good people. I don't need anything more. Subscribe for more daily stories.